Reading my amusement, my mother reached for my hand and tugged me gently toward the door with a sudden smile. I allowed her to pull me into the doorway, as my eyes met Bella's. She frowned at my reluctant expression disapprovingly, and waved for me to go of my own accord. "Bitch." My mother began hurling questions at me as she led me through the doorway into a darkened and stench-filled room that made me recoil instinctively.
"How are you? Where have you been living? Did you stay in the city? I never could bring myself to leave. Do you still play piano? Is spaghetti still your favorite food?"
She finally turned to my blank expression, and her eyes, though no longer void of emotion, still appeared gray and vacant with just an inkling of excitement mingled beneath. I remained silent as my eyes shifted around the stench-filled room. I wasn't sure what it was meant to be. Perhaps a sitting room, or a living room? Maybe even a parlor room or den? It looked awful, and I could hear the telltale scratching of vermin in the walls. There was a sofa on the far end of the room that looked brown, but was probably once a light tan. What kind of shithole was this woman living in? When my gaze once again shifted to hers, she was wringing her hands nervously, scanning the room with her wide and vacant excitement-laced eyes.
"Can I get you something to drink?"
She abruptly paused with a noticeable rigidity, and jerked her gaze to mine. All traces of excitement vanished.
"You shouldn't be here,"
she whispered sharply, and I was thankful beyond all reason that I hadn't let my earlier hopeful emotions penetrate me. "I know," I said honestly before looking over my shoulder, and searching my side for my lifeline. I found her by the door swinging her red skirt from side to side, and smiling at me sweetly. She began humming something under her breath, and when I recognized it as the Scooby-Doo theme song, one soft chuckle escaped my lips. Her red lips curled up into a smirk, and she winked at me. Sufficiently distracted from the pain her words threatened to produce, I turned to my mother, and cleared my throat. "I just came to apologize, and then I'll be on my way," I spoke stiffly, while her eyes scrutinized my face in that uncomfortable way again.
"You have his nose,"
she blurted, and took one step closer before her brows furrowed softly.
"Apologize?"
she asked, tilting her head and searching my eyes. I nodded curtly, and somehow managed to gather the courage to follow through. I think I had just blocked out all emotions, and the numbness somehow made it possible. "I know I fucked up back then and ruined your life, and I just wanted you to know I'm very sorry." My voice was so controlled, it even surprised me in my ears. I could hear Bella's soothing voice, but couldn't discern her words. Her gray eyes narrowed and furrowed deeper, as she searched my face again, and stepped closer.
"What did you just say?"
she asked, and I could see her hands in my periphery tighten into fists at her sides. I repeated my apology once more, though this time refrained from using expletive. I wondered briefly if maybe it had ruined the sincerity of apology, though she only seemed to grow more confused and upset as she stepped closer once more. I was bracing myself for impact once again, knowing well and good that I'd let this woman physically harm me and not do one fucking thing to stop it. From somewhere in the room, I could hear Bella's soft snort.
"What do you have to apologize for?"
she grated, and I could see her jaw lock, as her eyes shone with moisture, and I battled to remain at ease. I hated her in that moment as I stood in her shithole of an apartment, and stared at her trembling frame of a skeleton. As if this weren't already difficult enough, she wanted me to say the fucking words and everything. Couldn't she just accept a fucking apology? Couldn't she give me that? "I'm sorry for the fire, and I'm sorry I didn't help." My voice wavered, and I was praying she wouldn't make me say more. Bella's voice in my ear was whispering about the most inane things: the perfect temperature in which chocolate's chips melt, the correct way to cut beef against the grain for maximum tenderness. She plucked pieces of the past in an attempt to soothe me. It barely worked. My mother blanched and recoiled before shaking her head.
"We should sit."
She motioned to the sofa, and in the darkness of the room, I could just barely discern a glimmer on her cheek. The realization that she was crying made me suddenly infuriated, whether with her or myself, I couldn't say. But I walked to the dark sofa and stiffly lowered myself to perch on the edge of it. Bella was now at my side, and she smiled at me tenderly.
"Once you have your sauté ready, you have to be quick, considering the smoke point of the oil you're using. Proper prep is key, Edward.
She had the most stern expression on her face, and I was able to recall with clarity the day she had said those words to me. I was thankful for this version of Rebella. She was much more realistic. I allowed myself a ghost of a smile, and shifted my gaze to my mother. The room was silent, and I wasn't going to speak first. I didn't feel comfortable on the sofa, but I didn't dare move 1 inch. Every now and again, Bella would speak, and mention something familiar and soothing. After what felt like an hour of still silence between us, my nose had begun to acclimate itself to the stench in the room. My hands were still clammy, but I kept them palm down on my knees, refusing to flinch whenever she would make a movement. Looking at her face felt so different and foreign to me. I had been so long looking at faces that weren't like mine. People would sometimes make attempts to link Carlyle's and my features if they were unaware of our situation, but nothing was really there. Here, I was looking at things that were familiar to my own face. I had sketched her lips and chin for years, but really looking at them felt tangible and gave me an odd and false sensation of belonging. She rested on the arm of a nearby chair, and began smoothing her hair with her hands. There was a window behind her, illuminating her silhouette, and making it impossible to see her face clearly anymore. I was thankful.
You blame yourself for something,
she whispered as she dropped her hands to her lap. A humorless chuckle erupted from my chest before I could suppress it. Is there anything I shouldn't be blamed for? I asked flatly, ignoring Bella's tisk of disapproval from my side. She was playing Bella too well.
Tell me why you think these things,
she whispered in an almost venomous hiss, and I could see the dark outline of her shoulders grow rigid with tension. I could feel one corner of my lips pull down into a hard scowl as my eyes narrowed. The Bella at my side had only a soft sigh of defeat, and one single word to offer to this exchange. Damn. I think these things, because I did them, I growled unabashedly as my anger and resentment mingled and consumed my emotions. I think these things, because I'm the motherfucker who said hey, it's hot, dry, and there's a fuckload of fabric in here. Let's use candles, I spat dryly, finding less enjoyment from her wince than I'd expected. I knew it was wrong, but I had no control over the growing volume of my voice. I think these things, because I watched him fucking burn to death, and did nothing. Is that what you want to hear? Are you happy now? I finished. Or at least I thought I had, but surprising us both, my body lurched upright, and I was sneering down at her silhouette. I think these things because my mother threw me away like a piece of curbside garbage. Tell me if these answers are satisfying you, Mommy, because I could go on for hours. I've had 10 fucking years to think real hard on it. I sneered, and fuck, that felt good for about 1 minute, and then I was horrified by my outburst, and immediately sunk back down to the sofa. Sorry, I choked out remorsefully, attempting to regain control of my emotions by inhaling the stench of the air deeply. What the fuck was I doing? I had lost sight of my purpose, and Bella had conveniently vanished from my side. This was accomplishing nothing. Emmett had no fucking idea how easy he had it. The dark room fell into an uneasy silence, and after many moments of watching her figure's stiff outline in my periphery, I began forming an escape plan. My mind idly calculated, I could be off the sofa, past the kitchen, and out the door in 3 seconds flat if I ran fast enough. And trust me, I'd run fast enough. After maybe 20 minutes of this charged silence, an abrupt whimper came from her vicinity, and I shifted my gaze enough to see her hand cover her mouth. I furrowed my brows and dropped my face into my hands, feeling the guilt of my outburst consume me with remorse. My escape plan was looking so attractive that I scooted closer to the edge of the sofa, ready to depart. Suddenly, she spoke in an even and toneless voice. All evidence of her whimper vanished.
I know you haven't known me for the last 10 years, so you can't really appreciate what I'm about to say, but...
She paused, and I could see her head turn to gaze out the window, the soft line of her profile illuminated and sharp.
I've never felt more deserving of death than I do at this moment.
She finished so quietly that I had to strain my ears to hear. Her words puzzled me, and I kept my body still and prepared for escape. Proper prep is key, Edward. With that agonized sigh, she rose from her position and walked to me. My body hummed with tension every inch. She grew closer to me. When she had come close enough, she crouched down, tilting her head to gaze into my eyes. The hard set of her frown appeared loathing and disgusted, and the sight of it made my stomach churn, despite my insistence to remain unaffected.
The fire was electrical, Edward,
she whispered, allowing her face to relax minimally as she edged closer to my knees. My brows pulled together in confusion as I scrambled and drove my back into the sofa. Still, she edged closer and continued,
I never once blamed you, and you can't take one fragment of fault for anything.
Her expression turned furious as she approached me, now close enough to touch my knees, while I cringed away. Her hands abruptly grabbed mine and squeezed them tightly as she stared into my eyes with a frantic expression.
I won't let you.
Stop lying. A thunderous and startling scream erupted from my throat as I lurched off the sofa and flung myself at the door. My hand had just grasped the knob when she begged in a pained and desperate whimper.
Please don't go.
I might have been able to ignore the plea if it weren't punctuated by loud and agonized sobs that tore at my conscience. I smacked my palm against the door with a piercing growl of frustration as I turned and collapsed against it in defeat. Whether or not I wanted to admit it, she had more power over me than anyone, Bella included. It made me impossibly more resentful and bitter. My body slid down the door and I rested against it with my knees to my chest, ready to leave, knowing I could and hitting every fucking second of it. And where the fuck was Bella when I needed her? My head rested against the wood as I stared ahead blankly. I sat for a long while in the dark against the door, and the only sounds of the apartment were her constant stifled sobs and the distant scratching of vermin. I closed my eyes and wrapped my arms tightly around my knees. I imagined I was in my bed with my girl. Her cold toes were caressing my ankles, and I was smiling into her hair. I was asleep within seconds. Sometime during the afternoon, I had lowered my body and curled up against the door. I didn't get much sleep before I was awoken with a violent recollection of flames licking at my chest. I jerked upright, frantically rubbing at my eyes, and trembling against the yellow wood. At first I had forgotten where I was, and it took me a moment of panic to become lucid and coherent enough to remember everything. My breaths escaped in pants, and my dampened face felt cold and heavy. I allowed myself a good while to recover from the dream, mixed with the panic of waking from it in an unfamiliar location. I desperately craved a cigarette and cursed myself for leaving them in the car. I strained my ears to listen for any movement inside of the dark building, too apprehensive to begin looking for myself. After many minutes of hearing nothing, I rose from my position and stood awkwardly while stretching my stiff muscles. Deciding I could exit unnoticed and overwhelmed with the craving that gripped me, I delicately twisted the knob of the door and eased it open. It creaked slightly, forcing me to pause and scowl at the antiquated hinges disdainfully. Eventually, I had worked it open just far enough to slip out and close it softly. It had already begun to grow dark, and I could feel the air cooling with the setting sun. The evening air was staggeringly fresh compared to the smell to which I had nearly grown acclimated. I made a beeline for the Volvo, and had a cigarette out and in my hand within moments. And then I was left with this opportunity. I could have left then as I leaned over my seat and retrieved my cigarette lighter from the console. I could have escaped this whole fucked up situation and gone on with my life. But I couldn't, and if I were being truthful with myself, it didn't really have anything to do with her plea for me to stay. I was curious about the shit she'd said, and I wanted to know what it meant. I wanted to know why, if she truly didn't blame me, she would send me away. It was always easier for me to just believe she hated me for what happened. It made sense to me, it made everything fit and fall into place the more I dwelled on it over the years. Now I was left with questions, and they consumed my every thought. I sat on the front stoop of her building and smoked my cigarette, watching the cars and people, and leaving my mind blank for the moment until the door behind me opened. I turned my head and squinted against the ray of setting sun that fell on my face. Her stare was blank and hollow, yet questioning. It was interesting how her every emotion was simply lacing the nothing whatsoever that was already present in her eyes.
I was afraid you'd left,
she admitted quietly, and still lingering on the knob.